Morning, folks. It's Wednesday, 23rd of April, 2025, and welcome to Tinfoil News. Let's dive into some of the world events that are happening just now. We will start with Ukraine, which is where we left off yesterday. We had been talking about the drivers for the conflict, where we got to, why we got to there, and all those kind of good things. And now we're at a stage where the certain parties are negotiating with each other, and it's a really interesting mix of what's going on right now. So just to kind of recap on a couple of items that I didn't really cover yesterday, but are kind of important to today's program. The war in Ukraine is essentially a Western proxy war against Russia. It's to make Russia bleed. It's to isolate Russia. It's always been designed to do so. Anyone that says that you know, the Russians drove this war into Ukraine, I think you're maybe not quite seeing the whole picture. I'm not saying they're saints. I'm certainly saying that there's actions they could have taken a lot earlier to avoid things. But we've actually pushed this war onto Russia 100%. There's no two ways about it. And I covered that in yesterday's program. So, but at the moment, what we've got is we've got Russia and America negotiating with each other on how to end the war. You've got the Europeans and the Ukrainians kind of working together to try and stymie those efforts, or stymie, if that's the right way to say it, to stymie those efforts. And that's because everyone's trying to achieve their maximalist objectives. Russia, as I said yesterday, wants to demilitarize, denazify, and reduce Ukraine's ability to be able to essentially wage war against them. Fair enough. Ukrainians, on the other hand, are a sovereign nation and they very much want to be able to do what sovereign nations do. Again, fair enough. At the same time, we've got other players, kind of sitting in the background, America, the European Union, who are pushing for their own slightly different but almost parallel objectives into Ukraine. And those objectives are very much around access to Ukraine's minerals, and also being able to make sure that the I suppose the military border between the West and Russia is as close to Russia as possible. Again, understandable objectives to try and achieve. But those objectives from both sides clash with each other and they're never going to be achieved. So someone somewhere is going to have to compromise. And that's what's happening this week. So today, even, there is a meeting in London between the Americans, between the Ukrainians, between the British. I think the French are there as well. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to discuss how to end the war peacefully. And there's obviously different. You've almost got three different paths to try and achieve that. The Americans have a plan, which is led by General Kellogg, who's essentially the senior military advisor within the US. And part of that plan is to potentially recognize the likes of Crimea and the four other states or sections of Ukraine that have already been mostly taken over by the Russians, to kind of recognize that that's Russia now. That's part of Russia. It seems that the Europeans and the Ukrainians are not going to accept that. So whilst they might accept that the Russians have it just now, they're not saying that that's part of Russia forever. Fair enough. We're talking about sovereign territorial integrity here, and the Ukrainians are never going to turn around and say, "Yeah, have our land. Please stop the war, but just have our land." It's never how wars end. It doesn't really work. Even at the end of the First World War, when I think it was Alsace and Lorraine was kind of transferred from Germany back to France. It was supposed to be. It was never supposed to be a permanent peace, although it was written as such a way, and it was one of the reasons, or one of the partial reasons, which led to the Second World War. To be brutally honest, certainly the 1919 Treaty of Versailles was very, very harsh and essentially engendered uh, a lot of bad feeling within Germany. The amount of money that they had to repay really hurt, and then there was other things as well, like the Great Depression, other things that kind of led to the rise of a certain person of Austrian heritage, which led to the Second World War. So we're in kind of we're kind of getting into similar ground again, where what the Russians or their perspective is that they want an agreement that is going to make sure that there's no future wars, that they don't have to worry about their western border to Europe. And obviously, the Ukrainians want to try and do the same, but they've got two very different ways that they're trying to achieve it. Now, the meeting today in London is going to be really, really interesting because I think the Russians have actually got um, not that they're going to be in the room, but I think they've got a link to the Americans in wherever the talks are being held. So essentially, it's almost like it's going to be like relayed in real time as to what's happening and what's being said and what can be agreed. So we might end up today with a really, really fast moving situation whereby lots of information comes out saying Russia's proposed this, or America's proposed this, France proposed this, Britain's proposed this, etc., etc., etc. So hold on to your seats for this one because what's coming today could be really, really interesting. It could actually set the tone for where this conflict goes next. Um, Obviously, from a UK's point of view, I want to see the war finished. I don't want to be thinking about the UK sending troops to Russia. That's sorry, into Ukraine, not into Russia itself. Um, there is a history of of European troops doing really, really badly when it comes to fighting Russia. And I'd really, really hate to see that like history repeat itself. And Russia has a really big fear of Europeans coming into the land and causing lots of problems. I mean, Jesus, I mean, just look at the Second World War, 28 million Russians dead. That's there was a fair chunk of their population. So rightly so, they've got a big fear of Europeans gearing up to roll into Russia. And similarly, Europeans have had many, many decades of Russia really far over into Central Europe. Obviously splitting Germany down to the east and west Germany, and obviously Russia had taken over the likes of Hungary and Czechoslovakia back in those days, and they had a huge footprint in Europe. So both sides are very, I suppose, naturally wary of each other, even though you can argue that we're all Europeans together. History means that we don't often play nice together, and we've had some issues. So today is really interesting because it could be the first steps towards an actual path to peace, as it were. I One of the things though, and this is having looked at Kellogg's plan, I don't see how the Russians are going to accept it in its current form. And there are some reasons why I don't see why it's going to be accepted. So I'll go through them one by one. First of all, we're talking about um, we're talking about freezing the contact line where it is. So that's all along through like Zaporozhye, Kherson, obviously, and through the Donbass region and up to where it is. So essentially, what they're saying is we'll freeze the contact line where it is right now. Russia, that's yours. We'll recognize Crimea. We might even recognize the other parts that you've already taken over. The Ukrainians are already saying no to that. They won't accept that. The other part of the plan is that there would be potential for European peacekeepers or something of that nature, along with American peacekeepers and some other nation, not part of NATO, to send in troops and to be peacekeepers as well. I wonder who that other nation could be. It could be someone like China. That potentially could be what's coming, or it could be someone like India or someone like that. Like a big nation with a big industrial output. I could see that being the case. Or Brazil, for instance. Part of a member of the one of the members of the BRICS countries, for instance. So that is one of the things that the Russians have always said. We're not going to accept, a peacekeeping force on Ukrainian soil. So it'll be interesting to see if they relent on that. If I suppose if the force matching is slightly different, we could see potentially European troops alongside American troops, alongside some sort of international partners to ensure that the peacekeeping, or sorry, the whatever comes out of the peace deal is held, so that the ceasefire is not broken by either side in any way. And speaking of ceasefires, the problem that we have with ceasefires at the moment, and we see this a lot in the press about how the Russians are always breaking ceasefires. There's never a mention about the Ukrainians breaking ceasefires, even though there's documented evidence of it doing so. Um, just to give you one, so, and I'm not saying that the Russians didn't break ceasefire; they probably did, but the difference that I see on what I found in my searches on various different resources is we have, for instance, the Ukrainian general, which is that Syrskyi at the moment? Yeah, Syrskyi, basically standing up and saying the Russians have broken the ceasefire 2,000 times, 3,000 times, whatever the number was, and zero evidence. There's no videos, there's no nothing. It's just a case of like, yeah, they've assaulted 150 times, they've fired 2,000 shells or whatever. There's no video evidence of that, and it's just someone standing up and saying it. And he might be right. He may be true. I'm not casting aspersions in that sense. What I'm saying though is the difference is that there were documented and videoed uh, instances of Ukraine breaking the ceasefire, and which were shared on the internet, and not shared just on Russian, pro-Russian sources. Basically, they were shared on various different places around the world. So there was definitely a HIMARS strike within the Donbass region, which was in one of the cities. I think it might have been Donetsk. I'm not quite sure. Um, but I'd have to go back and check, to be honest. But yeah, there was like one of these videos where it's geolocated, it's timed, and it's not propaganda, and it's just like everyone's pretty pissed off, to be honest. And I'm not saying the Russians didn't do that; they maybe did. It's just that there's a difference between the evidence. That's all I'm saying. So we've got these instances where ceasefires have clearly been broken, and this is a 30-hour ceasefire. This was supposed to be an Easter ceasefire, which Putin had said. I think it was on the Friday of that week, on Easter Friday, basically saying, "Look, we're going to do a 30-hour ceasefire to cover Easter Sunday, essentially." Which is a big thing in the Orthodox Christian calendar. And so it makes, and Putin does this on a fairly regular basis when it comes to an Orthodox Christian holiday or something that needs some sort of worship or something like that, then he will announce a ceasefire for that. Whether it holds or not, that's not for me to say. What I'm saying though is that a 30-hour ceasefire, which was broken and 100% broken, is a problem. Because if you can't have a ceasefire for 30 hours, there's no way you can have a ceasefire for 30 days. Um, and there's also it's it's not even arguable. It's actually true. The 30-day energy ceasefire, which was brokered back in, I think it was mid-March, and supposed to go through to mid-April, so it's over now. Um, that was broken by both sides. Now you can argue who broke it first. I suspect it was the Ukrainians when they blew up the Suja pipeline and pointed at the Russians and said, "Well, you blew that up," and the Russians went, "No, we didn't. That's our pipeline. Thank you very much." Um, I'll let experts decide who fired what shots and when. I don't have enough information. What I can say with some confidence is that both sides broke that ceasefire over 30 days. 100%, both sides broke that ceasefire. So that was a 30-day ceasefire, and that was supposed to just be for energy infrastructure. Didn't hold. Then you get to a 30-hour ceasefire over the Easter weekend. Guess what? Didn't hold that either. So there's a problem with ceasefires. It doesn't look like the Ukrainians and the Russians really want to stop shooting each other. So where does that get us when we're actually talking like we're talking about peace deals and things like that in London? Um, and just as an aside, there have been so many meetings in Europe. Whether it's in Paris, whether it's in London, and it seems to be between Macron and Starmer. They seem to be the drivers of all of these meetings that are happening in Europe right now to try and drive their version of peace, which is fine. Um, and that's what we have today in London. We have another attempt, or maybe just like the latest iteration or latest step along the path towards some sort of peace. Ultimately, though, the plan that is being presented is America's plan. It's Kellogg's plan, which doesn't really address any of the stated Russian aims for what they say is the reasons why they started the special military operation. And I see a big problem with that, not because I'm pro Russian or pro UK or pro Ukrainian or whatever. I see a problem in the sense of just like it's just basic negotiation. For background, I've been involved in varying different levels of negotiation of varying different types of contracts over my career, which I've spent in the energy industry. And some of them are quite simple deals. Some of them are really complex, three-party type deals. And so that's what you've got here. You've got quite a complex, at least three-way type deal or negotiation that's on the go at the moment. The complexity of those negotiations means that you actually have to listen to the other side, and you have to understand what their drivers are. You have to understand why they want what they want, why they're trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And the art of negotiation, that anyone that's been involved in this, is to try and find common ground. Is to try and find out where the red lines are, so you can push as much as you can, or you let them push as much as you can. So you get to an agreed place. Now, if you can't do that, you're not going to have an agreement. That's just logic. Um, so here's me kind of sitting here with my kind of contractual just head on that ultimately where is this going to go? Is this a meeting that's being set up to fail essentially? Because it could be, and that's not a conspiracy theory, although maybe let's get our tinfoil hats out for that one. But it's not necessarily untrue to think, or wrong to think, I should say, that some of these meetings are actually just stepping stones to take the public along a journey. Um, we've seen that in previous conflicts or things like that. Iraq is a really good example of that. The level of duplicity that was put forward by the British government at the time to take Britain to war for the second time in Iraq um, was astonishing. Um, I'm not sure how much I can say about the UK government and how many of them should be in jail, but I think a few of them should be, to be brutally honest. The level of lying was big. The doctoring of evidence, which has since come out, was big. So this is an issue. And so you have to keep these things in the back of your head when you see what's being presented to you via the current media. The media right now are saying that this is the only way to peace. It's not. That's not true. What it is this is the preferred UK, European, American path to peace. There are different paths to peace, obviously. There are paths to peace that would maybe take in some of the opposition's objectives. And that's maybe where we have to get to. It's not just a case of, right, we'll concede territory. And America says, yeah, we'll concede some territory. Yeah. So Ukraine will concede some territory, we'll recognize it. And then the Europeans and the UK don't, because then you just end up in just a messy situation. That's no use to man or beast. It also doesn't reflect that Russia is very, very strong on Ukraine's army being reduced to a level whereby it cannot attack Russia again. Which is quite a reasonable suggestion from Russia to basically go, look, you don't need an army X big unless you're going to attack us. Because if you want an army this big, then the only reason you're going to do that is to start firing your guns at us. Basically, that's not acceptable to us. So the Russians are trying to reduce the size of the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian as a sovereign nation are saying, nope, we're not going to do that. So that's a bone of contention, which hasn't been sorted out at all. There are other elements to this deal as well. There's also the weaponry as well. So one of the things I said in yesterday's program that was one of the main drivers for Russia going to war. By the way, you can check some of this out on the within the Library of Congress. Is like some of these are public documents. You can see what America was intending to sell to Ukraine, which made the Russians go, we're not too happy with dual use missile systems being sold. And the Americans told them to Jeff off, basically said, no, we'll sell whatever we like to whoever we like. There's no limit within Kellogg's plan on what American weaponry can be sold to Ukraine. which ultimately means they could go back. We could go back to a position in late 2021 where America sell dual-use missile systems, and somehow Ukraine acquires a nuclear warhead. These are not objectives that are going to be satisfactory to Russia. That's not going to. That's not what they said they wanted to achieve when they started their special military operation, as they call it. So, with all of these things together, it's hard to see how there's a path to peace that's currently being laid out. Now, events might well overtake me as we go through the rest of today, which is interesting, which I will find personally very, very interesting. So I might end up having to do another program later, or I might save it for tomorrow when I put out the next one. So hold on to your hats, wait for the information. We'll see what comes out, and I'll speak to you in the next one. So that's essentially that's Ukraine and Russia kind of dealt with. The next thing that I really want to talk about, and this is one of the other things that's kind of been brewing for a while, um, is the conflict with Yemen and Iran. And this is an American and Israel-led conflict with Yemen and Iran. Now, it's been brewing for quite some time. I think the Americans have wanted Iran not to be, have wanted to kind of clip their wings for quite some time. And it's interesting to see how that process is kind of playing out. I don't think the Iranians are terrible people. I think like from biology, one of these things is that I'd love to go around this part of the world and actually meet these people themselves. But because there's so much strife, it's one of these things where it's like, would it be safe to do so? What would happen? What would your government think if you went to certain places in the world? All of that kind of stuff. So you kind of take that into consideration. But having seen some some really good programs, particularly like food type programs where people like travel around the world, like Rick Stein and people like that, there are various foodies that have gone to these cultures, whether it's Israel, whether it's Iran, whether it's Syria, or wherever, and to be honest, they all look lovely. The food looks incredible. The people look incredibly welcoming. I think it just seems that the political classes hate each other for historical reasons, and so they're the ones that are kind of executing and perpetrating the various schemes and whatever against each other. So what's happened in that part of the world recently? So we know that so Syria was toppled. There's a huge amount of evidence that, for instance, we know what's happening in Israel just now, and there are many people dying in Gaza. There's a boatload of evidence that's come out about Netanyahu who actually knew what was coming and just allowed it to happen. There's also the amount of, I suppose, propaganda that came out shortly afterwards about uh, the Hamas beheading, pregnant mothers and ripping, unborn babies out of bellies and all this kind of stuff. It was all propaganda, and it's all been found to be propaganda as well. There also seems to be the Israelis executed a particular piece of reaction force, which basically means that they don't allow terrorists to try and take people as hostages. I'm trying to remember what protocol it's called, and it's escaping me for the moment. It's not the David protocol, the Goliath protocol. It's something like that. But essentially, what it means is like if the Israeli or defense forces know that a mass terrorist attack is taking place, then essentially they just kill everyone. That's it. They don't want hostages taken because they don't want to be essentially bent over a barrel. And it does have a very specific name, this particular protocol, and it came out afterwards. One of the big things was that there was a big festival happening, one of the Nova festivals that was happening in one of the kibbutzes in Israel. And at the time, it was said that Hamas just ran amok and just killed a whole bunch of people. Well, it's just come out by the Israeli government's own admission. It was actually one of their helicopters that just mowed down everyone. There was tanks blowing up, all kinds of stuff. And so it seems to me that probably, based on what all of these reports, if you stack them up one after another, it actually looks like the Israelis killed more of their own than Hamas did, which is an incredible thing to say. But even more incredible is that the Israelis absolutely knew it was coming. It's one of the most um, heavily monitored parts of the world. There's no way that Hamas could have got everything together without the Israelis knowing. And there's no way that Israel could have taken 6 to 8 hours to mobilize their helicopters to do X, Y, and Z. It just it beggars belief. Put it like that. So all of these things kind of stack up. That was the first thing. So Israel went so October 7th, Israel goes after Hamas basically, and has executed a reasonably successful war against them. And I say reasonably successful in the sense that they have clearly limited Hamas's ability to fight. Not reasonably successful in the sense that they've killed 50,000 plus civilians, which is an absolutely horrendous number. And it's way more, I think it's way more civilians than actually have been killed by Russia in the Ukrainian war in 3 years. And essentially, the Israelis have managed to do it in, was it 8 months, something like that? It's an extraordinary short time and an extraordinary high death rate amongst civilians, and most of these are women and children, as we know. And there's daily videos coming out of like bombs falling on tented camps and things like this, and it's frankly it's disgusting. But that's what's happening in Israel. Then they went after Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and executed that. And then, with the help of Turkey, they toppled the Syrian government, which is a US led operation. It has been a US led operation to topple Assad since about 2014, I think. So it was very much a case of, I mentioned this yesterday, Jeffrey Sachs mentioned Operation Timber Sycamore. This is the CIA operation to take out Assad, basically, and to topple the Syrian government. Now, why did they want to do that? Well, actually, taking out Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria and toppling the Syrian government actually opens the airspace towards Iraq, through northern Iraq and into Iran. And why is that important? Well, Syria had a very, very intricate and dense network of air defense systems. So anytime the Israelis wanted to attack Iran, essentially the way they would do it was they would kind of go north over kind of Lebanon and potentially into, I suppose, western Iraq. The Syrian air defense system would pick this up because they would see, masses of planes and tankers and refueling tankers and whatever, getting those planes towards their strike targets in northern and I suppose western Iran. So the Iranians would get plenty of warning. Now, the Iranians don't have a great air defense network, even by their own admission, although they recently signed a deal with Russia to improve that hugely. So we'll see how that goes. But that's the reason why, I suppose it's probably the reason why the Israelis took out Hamas, Hezbollah, and then obviously that ended with the toppling of the Assad government. It allows that path with very little warning for Iran now that a strike is coming. So whereas before they might have had like a couple hours warning that something was coming their way, now they'll get very little warning, and that's part. I suppose that's part of the calculus of what Israel is doing. So they're taking out piece by piece by piece all of what they deem their potential enemies. Apologies, I've got a slight cold just now, and so nose is a bit runny. So that's where we are on the east, on the Israeli side of things. But obviously, you've got the Houthis in Yemen, who are essentially armed by Iran, who have taken massive umbrage to what's going on in Gaza, essentially in Palestine or Israel, whichever way you want to call it. And so we're in a position where the Houthis are firing missiles at various Israeli entities and into Israel itself every now and then. They fire missiles at ships. They've hit a few basically, and now we've got like 2 American carrier groups in that part of the world, which is quite a large strike force. There's also a whole bunch of B-2 bombers that have been sent to Diego Garcia, which is an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, so they can perform strikes as well. So America had moved around all their pieces to allow them to strike either at the Houthis or the Iranians, depending on how negotiations go. So we've now got a point where not only is America trying to negotiate with Russia about Ukraine, but they're also trying to negotiate with Iran indirectly via mediators and such like. Although I think one of the meetings recently was actually direct and face to face. And the premise about this is that was to force Iran into a position whereby they cannot enrich uranium beyond 60%. So it looks like the Russians are going to be guarantors on that certain deal that comes out. So there's potentially any kind of uranium that's over 60% enriched, the Russians will take and use for their purposes. And, whether it's in their nuclear reactors, nuclear weapons, or whatever, but they will be taken out of Iran and not for Iranian use. So, again, watch this space on how this one develops, because it looks like to me, it looks like America with one hand is basically saying we're going to do a deal with the Iranians. It's to stop them enriching uranium beyond 60%. But I do wonder whether in the background, whether they're kind of giving the tacit green light for Israel to go and attack Israel. Now, the Israelis can't do that themselves. Basically, they would actually need American logistical support. So any attack on Iran is not going to be just done by Israelis. It will be with American tankers and logistics, because they can't do it themselves. So watch this space on that one, because that could be interesting. Again, this is not tinfoil hat conspiracy. This is how the world is working in that part of the world. So we'll see how it develops, whether there will be an upcoming attack, and it might just be a case of Israel tries to attack some of the nuclear facilities, and they'll do that under the guise of the deal's not working. Basically, we needed to take it out, and that's so. Be prepared for that type of propaganda coming our way. And there was one last piece that I wanted to talk about before I finish today's program, and it was about energy pricing in the UK, which is kind of a little bit away from world affairs, but is something that's kind of close to my heart. So I've worked in the energy industry for a long time now, 20 years. I've worked with various different companies and seen it from various different angles. And one of the things that is really interesting in the UK is how our energy pricing is calculated. It's essentially calculated on the back of like gas pricing. So that means that all the other mixes and stuff like that have to be priced at the gas pricing. I mean, it's a little more complex than that, but I mean, essentially that's how it's bandied around. But energy pricing is traded in the UK as a commodity. So before me as a customer can buy that, or someone who can supply that energy to me, they essentially have to buy it on the open market. So it's not even a case of like, even if I think we produce something like 65% of our own energy needs, and we have to import the rest. But the thing is that it's not like we make all the oil and gas that's pumped out in the North Sea is kept for our use. What's happened is the oil and gas is essentially sold on the open market, and then we re-import that at whatever price, and then the people use that to generate electricity, and then they sell it on to the customer. And there's certain machinations to make that happen. The point is is that it's a very expensive way to the consumer, which is me, you, and everyone else in the UK, to buy our electricity. It's about the most it's one of the most inefficient ways of, or I suppose, of procuring energy for your household. And it's done, and you can argue cynically that that's done to keep the energy companies rich, and the traders rich, and everyone, every link in the chain, it keeps them making heaps of money, and it hurts us in our back pocket. But there was a really interesting article in the Guardian the other day, which was talking about £1 billion worth of energy theft occurring in the energy market, and this is primarily aimed at people that are stealing electricity, basically, splicing into whatever lines and whatever for nefarious activities, whether that's cannabis farms, whether that's prostitution rings, or whatever it is, basically. So it was basically trying to this is the dead cat tactic that you see governments use from time to time, and this is absolutely a dead cat tactic, because the energy prices in the UK are eye-wateringly high, basically, and they are not where they should be, and that's because of the system that we have invented, created, whatever, or has evolved to sell us the consumer energy. So this is very much akin to benefits cheats. You have a system in the UK where some people do cheat benefits, 100%, but it's a really small number, and the amount that's this that the UK government is cheated out of is minuscule compared to the tax avoidance that occurs at an industrial level by various entities. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get bloody libel letters or anything like that. But we all know who they are. We all know how they operate to minimize their tax exposure in a system that's very complex. Again, like the energy system, needlessly complex. And I think those systems are made needlessly complex so that there are loopholes built in for certain people and not for others. That's my take on it anyway. And now we're in a similar position where we had media for years talking about benefits cheats. This is how much they're taking out of the system, blah, 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 blah. These people are terrible. Now we've got energy cheats. That's what we're getting now, basically. And it's because the system has become indefensible. So they need a scapegoat. So essentially, that's the dead cat on the table. There you go. Have that basically. So I'd expect to see some more of that over time, and we'll see how that particular story develops. But it's really interesting that that's the first energy cheats story that I saw. And it's very akin to the benefit cheats stories that we see on a fairly regular basis. So be aware of that as it comes in. I think that's where I want to end the show today. I'll try and keep abreast of what's going on in the news, particularly with what's happening in London vis-a-vis Ukraine, Russia, and America. And if I need to do an update later, I will. But otherwise, we'll talk about it tomorrow. But in the meantime, have a great day. Take care. Bye bye.